Kumlen and a black Gemara. Today's Gemara is Daf Beizam and Aleph and Sechta Moed Katan Erev Shabbos Kodesh Pasha Shira. There is Moed Katan talks about Cholamoid, the laws of Cholamoid, and then it goes into the laws of Avelis. In fact, many people have a custom; they wouldn't learn Moed Katan at all because of the Avelis there, unless it was necessary, unfortunately, to know all these dinim. But because it's part of Daf Yomi, it's not an issue. We're just going through all the Gemaras. What is interesting is that the Gemara it's called Moed Katan, yet we call it Cholamoid. The Gemara itself in Sukkah calls it Yom Tov. What is the difference if we call it Moed Katan or we call it Chol HaMoed? Moed Katan means a miniature Yom Tov. Moed, Yom Tov, Katan, small. In other words, contrast to Yom Tov, it's Moed Katan. We call it Chol HaMoed. And Chol HaMoed is the weekday in the Yom Tov. It's actually not the same thing. As you know, there are two different customs, whether you wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed or you don't wear tefillin on Chol HaMoed. So Ashkenaz wears tefillin on Chol HaMoed. Most do not make a bracha, but they wear tefillin. And Nusach Sfard doesn't wear tefillin. In fact, the Zohar says Yichai Misa. What's the crux of their argument? So the question is, when we say that on Yom Tov and Shabbos you don't wear tefillin because they are a sign, what exactly is it about Yom Tov and Shabbos that makes it a sign? Is it the fact that we don't work? Is that what makes it a sign? Or is it the fact, the positive side of it, the kedusha? If it's the fact that we don't work, then Chol HaMoed, we do work, and therefore on Chol HaMoed we wear tefillin. But if it's because of the kedusha of Shabbos and Yom Tov, then Yom Tov Chol HaMoed also has kedusha, and therefore you don't wear tefillin. And the same thing here. If we're focusing on the kedusha, we'll call it Moed Katan. It also has kedusha in it, okay, but it's a bit less than Shabbos Yom Tov, but it's a Moed Katan. If we're referring to if we're focusing on the work side, then it's Chol HaMoed because under certain conditions you're allowed to work. So therefore, it's considered like a weekday because you can do work. And what about, can you actually work a Chol HaMoed? So the Gemara Chagiga Daf Yiches will bring some psukim there that teaches us that you shouldn't really be working a Chol HaMoed, but the Torah gave it over to Chachamim to decide what, when, where, which brings a big machlekes in the Rishonim. Some seem to be learning that it's Mahatorah, forbidden to work on Chol HaMoed unless you have these extenuating circumstances, and others say the whole thing's only D'Rabbanan. And basically, our mission is going to tell us that the criteria to be able to work in Chol HaMoed is it has to be a dover of it, something that if you don't do it now, it's going to cause you a loss. Loss of profit is called B'niyas HaRevach. B'niyas HaRevach is never considered a loss. A loss is losing money. If you don't do this, it's going to cause you a loss. And the second thing is it cannot be excessive bother, because if it's excessive tircha, then you're so distracted from the fact that it is, still Yom Tov for Chol HaMoed. So those are two conditions in our Mishnah. Not everyone agrees, and therefore we'll see different opinions. So once we talk about Chol HaMoed, we're also going to introduce Shemitah, and we'll talk a little bit about Shemitah as well, which is highly relevant as this year is the Shnas Shemitah in Israel. Mashkin Beis Hashalchim b'Moed. Now, if you remember, there's a Beis Hashlachin and there's a Beis Habal. Two kinds of fields. A field that can sustain itself on rainwater is called Beis Habal. Everything is settled, as Gemara will say. And Beis Hashlachin is a field that needs rainwater won't suffice. Let's say in a place where it doesn't really rain, or let's say, as Rashi gives an example, it's on the slope of a mountain. So the rainwater doesn't sit, it just pours right down. Then it needs irrigated water as well. So it says here, and in a field that needs irrigated water has to constantly be irrigated, otherwise you're going to lose your whole crop. Shamaskin Beis Hashlachim b'Moed, you're allowed to go ahead and irrigate a field that on Chol HaMoed that requires it, which is the Beis Hashlachim, Ubashvi, Shmita. So this is called to avoid a loss, and what do you do? Whether it's a brand new spring that you just created right now, and therefore there's a possibility the walls might cave in, but you're allowed to do it. And if you have to fix, you have to fix. And even an existing spring, you can go ahead and use that and to irrigate the field, because it's not considered a big bother. I will a mashkin, but you're not allowed to irrigate the field. Let's say there's a pool somewhere with rainwater. There it requires a big effort to manually take the water to bring it to the field. That you cannot do, even though there's a loss, you're preventing a loss, but it's too big of a bother. The from a well that you need a bucket, you need a lot of pails, you need a lot of bucketfuls of water to irrigate the field, too excessive bother. So again, it has to be not an excessive bother to avoid a loss, prevent a loss. Nor can you make little ridges around vineyards to fill up with water again, because that's a lot of work. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, Ein oisin esa amma. Amma is a word that we use throughout Shas to refer to a little creek. And we call it an amma because usually they were only an amma wide. So you're not allowed to dig out and create an amma on Chalamoid, because again, that's a big tircha. Start out for the first time on Chalamoid. Ubeshvius and a Shemitah. And the Chachamim say, Oisin es a amma betchila b'shvius. They say Shemitah is not the same criteria as Chalamoid. Shemitah, we don't care about bother. Shemitah, you're not allowed to plant. This is not really planting, so you're allowed to do that on Shemitah. It's only Chalamoid that you cannot do that because excessive bother. If something is existing but it's ruined and you have to fix it up, that you may fix up on Chalamoid. You're allowed to fix up things which are, let's say, water in a public place where people use for drinking water, and there's some issues with it. You're allowed to repair it on Chalamoid. The chaytnes, and you can clean out all the rocks and everything else. You can repair all the roads and all the streets that people cross on Chalamoid, because that's another criteria. Another option is if it's tzarchei rabim, if it benefits the public, you're allowed to do it on Chalamoid. There's mikveh hamayim, and the mikveh is the water as well. These are all communal needs. But you're allowed to do anything which benefits the public. You're also allowed to, we had the end of Shkolim there where they used to put a little white lime around the kvaras, so the kohanim should know where the grave sites are. They shouldn't step over them. You're allowed to do the Chalamoid. And they will go out to the field to inspect to see if there's climb growing. You can go also on Chalamoid. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. The Mishnah spells out that whether the spring was brand new, you're allowed to you're allowed to do that on Chalamoid for a field of Beis Shlachin, or whether it's an existing one. Well, the real problem is only a brand new one, because the walls might cave in, you might then end up doing more work. So all the Mishnah had to say was you're allowed to do a brand new one. So surely you're allowed to use an existing spring, and to direct it to go and irrigate the field. What's why did you have to spell it out? So now that you tell me, a brand new spring, and you're diverting it to go and irrigate your field, the osilin fully, where there's a possibility the wall might cave in. Mashkin, you tell me it's allowed to go ahead and to irrigate your field. An existing spring where there's no real concern that anything is going to collapse. The osilin fully, it won't collapse. You have to tell me you're allowed to. What's the point of that? Why the Mishnah even have to bother spelling it out? So the Gemara says, our Mishnah is doing two things. It's telling you you're allowed to use the spring, and it mentions both options of springs. But our Mishnah also says it's limited only to a Beis Shlachin, but not to a Beis Habal. A Beis Habal, you cannot, since it doesn't need it, you're not preventing any losses, you're not allowed to divert this water. So we might have, if the Mishnah only would have highlighted a spring that's brand new, we would have thought, well, a brand new spring makes sense. We don't want you to use as their bow, because it might collapse and you're doing work for no reason. But if it's an existing spring and you're doing a little diversion, which is not a lot of work at all, even though you're not preventing a loss, it's only to add more water, which obviously makes it more bountiful with the crop and everything else. But because there's so little work there, maybe you're permitted. So the Mishnah had to spell out, and the reason why we introduce this existing spring is to tell you, but nevertheless, in as they are bow, in a place where you're plenty rainwater, ample rainwater, you're not allowed to do that on your Chalamoid. Talking about a spring that's brand new, having another thought, with the Beis Shlachin, Beis Habal only over here to be saying you're not allowed to bring it to Beis Habal, Mishub doesn't pull it might collapse. I will may in a spring but a spring. Okay, I would have thought that maybe that you could even divert it into a normal field. Comes to teach you it doesn't make a difference. An existing spring, a brand new spring, you want to divert it to start irrigating only where you're preventing a loss, but that requires irrigation. But base abal, you can't. Says the Gemara. So the words, let's just understand the words. Beis Hashlachin means actually a place that is thirsty, a field that requires a lot of water. So the word shlachin is from the word thirst, and the word baal is from the word settled, relaxed, calm. So and therefore doesn't need any other water. My mashma, how do you see the word Beis Hashlachin? An expression of thirst. You see, it says a pasuk by Amalek, after you, if you're emaciated, you're gay, and you're tired. And what is it referring to over there? You're out in the wilderness and you were emaciated because you had lack of water. And the Targum on those words are the at mishali v'loi. By the word oyev, it says mishali, and we know that a hey and a ches are generally interchangeable, as if it says mishalchi and v'loi. So therefore we see that it means thirsty. So a field that is thirsty is called as a beis hashlachim. From this word, after oyev v'yogeh. Interesting. My mashbad I beis abal lishon lemiyasav. I know the word beis abal means calm and relaxed. It says ki yivel bocha b'sula, when a young man and a young woman live together, is and they talk about chassan kala, and they shall be happy with you. So metagaminan, and we translate adi kavodim metoisev ulam imsulta. So it's like when a young man and a young woman settle down together, yisafim gavecha b'naich, and your kids will live with you. So we see clearly it means settled and calm. It doesn't need anything extra, any other external additives. The rainwater is enough. That's what Beis Habal is. Says the Gemara, Saman Tana, who is the author that holds like our Mishnah? There are two conditions that need to be met. That first of all, the pseidein is only to avoid a loss, but to add benefit, that's not good enough. And then furthermore, even when there is a loss, if it's excessive work, we don't allow it, we disallow it. So we said, for example, you're not allowed to dig these things around the vines, or we said that you're not allowed to use buckets from a well or a pool of rainwater because it's too much work, even though you to avoid a loss. So who holds that you need two criteria? It seemed to be that this way Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. Now we look at the Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov says, "Moishchin es hamayi." Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov says that you draw water. If you already have a little creek, you're allowed to divert it to go from one tree to the next tree on Chalamoid. In other words, if one tree already has some water, you're allowed to divert it to go to another tree as well. It's not a lot of work at all. And it's not working. It's to avoid a loss. But you shouldn't make sure that the water just covers the entire field. The entire field doesn't really need it. It's only harvacha. It makes it just better, more fertile, but it doesn't really need it. There's no losses that you're trying to prevent. And I hold, says Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, that you need to prevent a loss and not too much bother. So therefore he must be the author of our mission. Who said? Over there is talking about a case because there's no loss. It's just it's harvacha the loitich. There's no big bother. So the water's already there. All you do is a little diversion from one tree to the next tree, and he says you're allowed to do. But the makam seder mishamle. But if let's say you're preventing a loss, maybe so we know one law from it. The only law from here we know is that you need a pseudo. Harvach is not good enough. But you don't know the other law is that if there is a pseudo, still you're limited only where there's no great bother. Maybe he holds that if there's a loss to prevent it, maybe you're allowed to go through excessive bother or chalamoid. We don't know that second law. So we cannot necessarily conclude that the author of Mishnah was Yaakov. Elon Papa Hamani, who is author of Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda. What's the story of Yehuda? The Tanya we learned, Mayin a brand new spring, Mashkin Mimeno, a brand new spring where it's possible that the walls will cave in. You're allowed to go ahead and to water from it. Afilus that is about. You're allowed to go ahead and water even a Sunday base about even an ordinary base about a base about is not a question of of avoiding a loss. It's a question of just making it more fertile. The main holds that even harbach is permitted, because there are those who hold that that if you lose profit, it's as if you had a loss. It's as if the profit is already yours in the bag, and not being able to get a hold of it is causing you a loss. Not like we say that a profit is over and above. It's not yet something that you have, and therefore can't say if you don't make a profit, you made a loss. Rabbi Yehuda says, a mashkin elas lebeis hashlachin. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's only limited to a beis hashlachin. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda says it's only limited to a field where you're avoiding a loss. Okay, so clearly he holds up Seder, but then he adds shecharva. That's desolate. That's in ruins. What does that mean? We'll come back to that in a minute. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says loikach v'loikach. Excuse me. Rabbi Elazar says not this and not this. We'll explain what Elazar in a minute. Yes, Yehuda goes further and he says, "Well, you found that a person should not navigate or should not divert. Amas hamayim, this little creek of water, v'yashke, and to irrigate leginosei to his garden, ulechub basei and his rooms, v'choyle shemoy lechalamoy." Okay, so here's you're not allowed to do that. We'll soon see. Now, my chorba, you started off saying, Rabbi Yehuda said that you're allowed to only irrigate a beis hashlachin, but if it's ruined, what do you mean it's a chorba, it's ruined? What do you mean? Ilema chorba mamish, that is completely ruined, that used to have, plantation and vegetative life, and it's all dead. Is lamalila mashkala. What's the point of irrigating it? You're not going to resuscitate it. Amar Abai says, shechorba memayin zeh, the yotzla memayin acher. They used to have a spring there, and then it lost use of the spring, and so therefore, if you're not going to continue to find another spring, you're going to lose the crop. So there's a case here of a loss. And yet, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? What can you use? We're talking about a hepzit, and yet he limits it only to a spring. Why? But he doesn't say go ahead and go to the well and bring it. I don't care where your source of water is. Bring as much water as you can. No, because there's the rules in place. Even though you're here to avoid a pseudo, there's still rules in place that you should make sure that you're not going to work too hard. Clearly, Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds you need both criteria. And the second thing, Rabbi Yehuda says you shouldn't go ahead and you shouldn't take this hamas hamayim and bring it to your garden again because it's too much work. Saying more further, Rabbi Elazar says, like kach. What do you mean, not this, not this? He says, loishna chora mayona, v'loishna loy chora mayona. He says, I don't care if there's a loss involved. In other words, you already had a spring that's growing, there's a loss involved. Now, Rabbi Elazar says, if it's a brand new spring, I don't like it. I don't like it because the walls might cave in and it might involve a lot of work. I don't like it. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds. We're saying charava. Charava is not referring to the field, it's referring to the spring that already had a spring, there's already a crop growing. So there's a loss involved. Yet I'm limiting you. You can only do work with a spring. So how do you know? Dilma, perhaps maybe Rabbi Yehuda says, when does he say he's limiting only to a beis hashlachin? In the case that he's talking about, a brand new spring. A brand new spring where the walls might cave in. So there's another worry here. I'll only allow it where there's a loss, but in the base of Bible, there's no loss, I won't allow it. But maybe he holds, not like a Mishnah, but maybe he holds an existing spring where there's no real concerns whatsoever. Maybe there he's relaxed and he'll hold even in an ordinary field. There is no loss involved. You can go ahead and make it more fertile. How do we know? Gilma, perhaps, because he's not talking about it. Asilin Puli, it might cave in, so it makes sense why he's very pedantic, particular. A brand new spring, a spring that's been existing before, and there are no real concerns. The Asilin Puli won't fall in, there's no real bother. Maybe he's very open with it. Afilu Bezonami. Says the Gemara, if so, Masnisin Aman Tarmaya. If you're going to learn that way, Rabbi Yehuda, fine. So who's the author of our Mishnah? We have three opinions here. The Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Meir is completely relaxed, even when there's only a question of profit. You have Rabbi Elazar that a new spring never allows it. It's the only one that we have that talks about a new spring that he allows it is Rabbi Elazar, and limiting the Beishlach is Rabbi Yehuda. And if you can tell me Rabbi Yehuda is not like our Mishnah because Rabbi Yehuda holds an existing spring, do it anywhere, even where there's only a question of profit, then who's the author of our Mishnah? So we have no choice but to say Rabbi Yehuda holds there's no difference in existing spring or a brand new spring, only limited to Beis Hashlach. Im Kain, a Masnista Matamai, who be the author of Mishnah. El Rabbi Yehuda, Loishna Ma'ayin Shiyotza Bechila. Rabbi Yehuda we must conclude. Rabbi Yehuda holds there's no difference if it's brand new spring, Loishna Ma'ayin Shiyotza Bechila, Beis Hashlochen in, Beis Habalai. Says the Gemara. So if so, you can ask me a simple question: why Taka doesn't Rabbi Yehuda include an existing spring? Why does he only refer to a brand new spring? Truth of the matter is, he is continuing what Rav Meir started. And Rav Meir is the first author of that Mishnah. And Rav Meir says, it's Rav Meir who brought the spring. And Rav Meir is the one who is being lenient. And when the real leniency of Rav Meir is that even a brand new spring, and even if it's only a case of profit, it's all right. And Rabbi Yehuda is continuing in what Rabbi Meir is talking about. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't introduce anything else. So the Gemara goes tell you how far Rav Meir goes. Rav Meir, and as Taisa says, we're always trying to tell you, highlight the one who is lenient. The one who's being machmir is no big deal. Everybody can be machmir. To say something is treif is no big deal. To say something is kosher, for that you have to be knowledgeable. So therefore, we're highlighting Rav Meir's cool leniency. Even a brand new spring where there's another, you have to entertain the possibility the wall might collapse, you'll have to repair it. Mashkim imenu, you're allowed to go and drink. And he goes further, afil is their bow. Even in the field, only a question of profit. Itmar, let's continue learning. Now we're going to learn Hamanachesh, if someone goes out there and weeds his field. If somebody goes ahead on Shabbos and he does the following: either he's weeding his field, when he removes the weeds in his field, right? So then he's doing is he's doing, he's in a way he's cutting off, or he's softening up, pulling out the weeds, lifts the dirt and the soil, so in a way he's plowing, but at the same time also he's allowing the proper produce crop to grow. So he's doing like two things. He's doing chodesh and he's doing like noteya, planting, or zoreya, planting. Noteya is for trees, zoreya. So hamanach, if somebody is pulling out the weeds, or a mashkim mayim l'zreim b'Shabbos, so if you're pouring water on plants on Shabbos. Now, when you're talking about a case where you're watering, you're going to the roots, again, you're softening up the dirt in a way it's like plowing. B'Shabbos, b'shumayim asinabei. So what hasra do we actually give him? We know when it comes to the laws of Shabbos, if you want to punish somebody, you have to give hasra. We're having more Shabbos. A few, something you have to know exactly, precisely which malacha you have to warn it. If you give him the wrong hasra, the guy will think, "Hey, what you talking about? I'm not carrying, I'm sewing, and I'm not getting punished." You have to nominate the malacha and get it right. So, which particular malacha are you going to highlight here? Rabbi says, "Mishum chaydish." Rabbi says, "You're plowing." Rabbi Yisrael says, "Mishum planting." Omar Rabbi says, "Rabbi, it makes sense." According to me, why? What's the idea of plowing? Literally, to soften up the ground. To soften the ground. He's softening up the ground. So therefore, the main thing here is chodesh. Forget about kaitze, because I don't want the weeds. So kaitze, when you cut and harvest, it's because you want this crop. Weeds you don't want. You want to get rid of it. So that's not kaitze. The question is chodesh or zereya. So it's what I'm doing is chodesh. So therefore, it's chodesh. And Amar Rabbi Yosef Kavadimus, that makes more sense to me. Ma darkish zereya. What's the idea of planting? It's muche pele, right? So the fruits, the crop should grow. Hachanami, it's my pele. By me pulling out the weeds, or by me watering it, I am making it grow. Taisus very interestingly gives a svara, like one of the Achronim. Taisus says they're arguing according to Rabbi. You look at the mice. The mice is you are definitely doing chodesh, you're softening up the ground. According to Rabbi Yosef, you look at the kavanah. Even though you are softening the ground, but my purpose is so that the existing crop should grow. Why am I pulling out the weeds? So the existing, true, lepoil, I'm softening up the ground. But what's my kavanah? What is my main intention? My main intention is for the crop to grow. So therefore, it's called zereya. And the same thing with the water. Why are you watering the ground? So that it should grow. But Rabbi says no. Even though that's what your intention is, here the fact is this is what you're doing. You are doing chodesh, and because you're doing chodesh, the malach of chodesh, you're considered as a chodesh. Abai is going to ask a very interesting question, and it remains with a question. Then it's as follows: I have a problem with your word. Or Rabbi Yisrael, I have a problem with your word. Very simple. So you both agree you're doing both things. You're doing chodesh today. The question is which one do you get punished for? Why not both? We know that if you do 4 malachas on Shabbos, you'll be chayav 4 sets of malchus. So over here also, he should be warned. You're being a chodesh, you're softening around, and you're being zerei. One for what you're doing, and one for what your intention is. Why only limiting it to Chodesh? What about Zeraya? And Rabbi Yosef Kasha. Maybe you'll tell me, maybe you'll tell me that on Shabbos, if you do, even though you transgress two malachas, you only get one malchus. Well, Rav Kana clearly said, if somebody, let's say, prunes a tree, and he needs those branches, but at the same time, the tree's going to grow back quicker. Is chayiv shtayim. You chayiv two avedas. Achaz l'shem l'teh, because you're causing the tree to grow back quicker, the branch grow back quicker. And achaz l'shem kaitze, most because you want the branches. So we see that for one act, the chiddush is one act, and yet you chayiv two avedas. So here also, he did one thing watering, he did one thing weed, and yet you can be chayiv two liable to avedas. Kasha, it's a kasha. Now, it's no way a refutation of Kahana's number, even though we had an ending more about Kamba, of Kahana was unbelievable. If you remember the whole beautiful story, which we'll learn eventually, of Kufidalde, we had to run away to Israel, and Rabbi Yechon was so worried about him because he was so smart and so sharp. But could be that Rabbi Yosef argued of Kahana. Could be that they hold if you do one Maisa on Shabbos, you'll only be chai one malacha. That's why I have to know which one it is. Rav Kana says each malach on Shabbos is independent of the next one, and therefore, if you did one ma'aser, but it's like two separate malacha, you get chayiv too. We'll have more makkahs. We had also before that you can do one ma'aser, and you can get a whole bunch of avedas for it. So over here also, but the Rabbi Yosef will know that when it comes to Shabbos, the main thing of Shabbos is the fact that you're transgressing the day of Shabbos itself. So if you did one Maisa, so you only did one transgression of Shabbos, even though it results as two separate malachas, you only get one Aveda. And that's the question. So which Aveda did you do here? That's what would seem to be the argument of Rabbi Yosef versus Rav Kahana. Whether every time you're over on Shabbos, you're over the Easter malacha generally of Shabbos, or each malacha itself. We had a little bit about it in the Gemara in the 7th page of Shabbos. Kasha, it's a kasha. So Gemara, Tais asked an interesting question. We have a rule, Makkis, the Shemrisha Achas Atem Mechayvei, you can only punish somebody for one, Misa, if somebody doesn't have very on Shabbos, which you get punishment is death and the punishment of Malchus. So we say, Kedei Rish Asoi, Shemrisha Achas Atem Mechayvei, Viatem Mechayvei, you only get one penalty, not two. So how can I kind of say two? So Taisus wants to tell you that when we use that rule that you can only get one punishment or two is with two different punishments, Misa and Malchus. And because it's two different punishments, then you only give one. But over here, it's totally two separate, it's the same punishment, two separate Avedas altogether. And they're both Malchus or both Misa, whatever it is. And therefore, it's considered Risha Achas. They both have to do with Shabbos. They're both the same punishment. That's called Ishach. When is it called Shtei Rishos? If there's two different levels of punishment. One is you get capital punishment, and one is you get Malchus. Two different levels of punishment is two Rishos. But if it's the same level of punishment, it's considered one Rishos. Anyway, Rabbi Yosef asked, I have a question. I have a problem with you. It says, Hamenache, somebody removing weed, or all the rocks, everything else around this plant. So Mamachafe, you're covering of, let's say, your plants with sand, like you get malchus because on climb you get malchus because you are helping to grow climb. Rabbi Kiva says, Af hamekayim. And Rashi has an amazing pshat. Rabbi Kiva says, if you saw climb grow and you did nothing about it, you're also liable. And that's an interesting thing. Usually we have a rule that you have to do something to be chayiv. Here Rabbi Kiva holds, and Be'ed Muzayim, Rabbi Kiva says, he said, Akimus Fosav Maisa. You still have to do something. Move your lips. That's called a Maisa. Here, Rabbi Kiva says, where Rashi learns, I quote Rashi, Sheroya Klayim is Roya Ve'ena Mevatlai. You saw it growing, or you saw it growing, Ve'ena Mevatlai, and you don't cancel it. An amazing thing. And you get Malchus for that. Other Shem have a hard time with Rashi. By the way, not everyone agrees that the Rashi we have here is Rashi, and many disagree. In fact, a lot of these little Masechtas, Rashi here, Rashi Tainis are those that say it's not Rashi. A lot of these Masechtas that people say, or Rashi Megillah, a lot of these Masechtas, they say, if you look at Shem Agdei L'Chidah, he talks about some of these Rashis here, who the author really is. Saying one further, according to me, that means I say Mishum Zereya I say that when you pull out weeds, what is it? You are planting. Okay, I understand why you're liable for climb, because you're not allowed to plant climb. I know that's it, climb, you're not allowed to plant climb. I'm going to you, Ahmed. You say Mishum Chodesh. You say it's plowing. Charisha beklayim miasira. You're telling me that it's plowing. Plowing by klayim, is it really us? Let's say, because there's two cases there. One was menachish and one was mechafa. You say that the isa of menach pulling out weeds is that you're plowing. Which says you're not allowed to plow climb? The isa is not allowed to plant. The Torah says you're not allowed to plant climb. Which says you're not allowed to plow climb. So why am I getting malchus? Malay, he said, you know what it is? Mishum. If you're pulling out the weeds, and the reason why you're high for planting is because you're letting it grow. Says the Gemara, what do you mean? That's Rabbi Akiva's word, and that's afterwards. When we're trying to say Rabbi Akiva just by letting it grow. Now, according to Rashi, the Gemara could have answered. Rabbi Akiva is saying he did nothing. He just saw it. And Tanakama says, no, doing nothing, I don't think you'll get malchus. But if you did something to support it, for example, you plowed, even though you didn't really plant, but you plowed, and this enabled it to grow, and everything else, okay, you're chayiv for growing. According to Rashi, you should have said that. So that's why the Shem don't really ask that question, but I could have added more questions to what the Shem have against Rashi. That's why they hold that Mekayim did something, a little bit, something. Anyway, so the Gemara answers, the entire thing is Rabbi Akiva. But the Bryce it's also explaining. It's explaining as follows. Is explaining like why Taki and Malchus because you're allowing it to go. So Kiva hold that even just allowing it to grow, you're already liable. My time with Rabbi Akiva, what's his logic? Tanya, we learned Sodcha it says that Sodcha, your field. Tell the pasuk, Sadcha, your field, loy sizra climb. You feel it said the pasuk you should you feel you should not plant or grow climb, and so on. So ainly elozarea. All we know is planting. Mekayim enayin. How do you know that you're not allowed to even just let it exist? It says in the pasuk like this. It says in the pasuk, you should guard all my chukim, that your animal loy sarbia climb, right? You shouldn't breed different animals together. And then it says sadchalis is a climb. So what you did was, if you after the word sarbia put a full stop or a comma, and then read the next word climb, but don't put it together with sarbia, which is breeding, but rather crossbreeding, but rather put the word climb with the word sadcha, and as if to say climb sadcha loy, as if to say that climb in your field shouldn't be, even without physically planting it. Just the fact that you allow it to be is already a problem. And that's how Rav Akiva learns. As if the word klayim is together with the word sadcha. Says the Gemara, if now we learn, mashkin it says that you're allowed to go ahead and you irrigate a beis hashlachin and now Mishnah here, and chalamoid nishmita. I understand why chalamoid there's a problem. There are two reasons why we allow you, because not so much of a bother, and there has to be a loss. Okay, I understand. No, what don't we allow you to do in chalamoid? Anything which requires a big tircha and anything which is not pseida. Over makom pseida, sharar rabban. So when it comes to chalamoid, if there's a loss and the tircha isn't that great, we are permitted. Okay. Elo shvi when it comes to shemitah, whether it's Rabbi Yisrael holds that the Isra irrigating the Isra because you're growing, and planting. The Isra of irrigating is because you're plowing. Why would you be allowed to use a spring to go ahead and irrigate your fields? Whichever malacha you want to argue, it's plowing or it's planting. And I'll do either one on Shemitah. So why would you be allowed to do this on Shemitah? And so what if there's a loss involved? Where do we find such a license that if there's a loss, you're allowed to take care of it in a Shemitah? And where do you find a license if it's less bother, more bother? It's irrelevant. The Torah said you're not allowed to plant and Shemitah. So what's pshat? It says in the pasuk, "V'chorish uvikotze tishbais," and we say even though it's talking about Shabbos, we learned Rosh Hashanah is talking about Shemitah. Our mission is talking about b'shviyah Shemitah b'zman hazeh. We're talking about Shemitah today when it's only the Rabbanan and the Rebbe and Rebbe. The Tanya. Now, why is Shemitah the Rabbanon today? We're having more Erchin. When there's no Yevel, there's no Shemitah. When there's Yevel, there's Shemitah. And interesting, and this will become an interesting shaila in the very near future, especially Mashiach will come very soon, and that is that if Roy, and the reason is because that's the majority of the Jews don't live there. Eventually, when the majority of the Jews in the world can't trust the statistic at all, because how many people are not identifying as Jews, but they are. Doesn't matter whether we know they're Jewish or not. The fact is it's not the Roy Yisrael, Yisrael. But when it will come a point that the majority of the Eden live in Yisrael, which then perhaps Yovel becomes Ma'at Torah, that Shemitah becomes Ma'at Torah, that some of the leniencies that we do now with Mechira and Shemitah and how to circumvent the rules of Shemitah because of the Rabbanan were a bit lenient. Once it becomes Ma'at Torah, it becomes very different. Anyway, so Abai said the Shemitah today is Rabbanan, we're going to take certain leniencies. What do you mean Rabbanan? It's Rebbe. The Tanya Rebbe says that Shemitah Shmoi. These are the laws of Shemitah. When it comes Shemitah, you have to cancel the Shemitah. But what do you mean? It says twice. Ze Dvar Hashmitah Shomit. What are these two Shemitahs? As far as we know, there's only one Shemitah. Acha Shemitah's Karka, but Acha Shemitah's Sofim. No, there are two Shemitahs. It says one is you have to cancel all your loans, and one is to do with property, and that is as follows. That means you have to leave your property lying fallow. That's Shemitah's Karkois. So we link Rebbe. What Rebbe does is he makes a link between the two. When you leave the ground fallow at the Mishamek Sofim, that's when you have to cancel your loans. There is a time when you don't have to leave your land fallow, which is today, because of the fact that there's no Yehu. So the Rebbe makes a link in the two, but our Rebbe that we need is not the fact that it links Shemitah's Karka, is the fact that he's telling us that Shemitah's Karka today is only Midrabanan. And if Shemitah's Karka today is only Midrabanan, therefore we're relaxed and we say, well, you know what, a spring, you're allowed to divert a spring and irrigate your fields when there's a loss and there's no bother involved. Rava says, Afilo Temer Rabbanan. Rava says, I will tell you, even if it's the Rabbanan who argue with the Rebbe, and they hold that Shemitah today is Ma'at Torah. Shemitah is Ma'at Torah. Nevertheless, even though this particular argument you don't really see, because all they're really arguing about is whether there's a link between Shemitah's Karka and Shemitah's Sofim. But maybe the fact whether there's a link or not a link has to do with the fact whether Shemitah's Karka is Ma'at Torah today or not. Says Rava, even the Rabbanan hold that Shemitah today is Ma'at Torah, we can allow you to irrigate. Why? The Torah only asked what's written clearly in the Torah, the others. But like go ahead and directly plowing the fields, going ahead directly planting seeds. But watering is only a tulda, even though it's causing to grow, but it's one step lower. And same thing here is that the watering is only a tool of plowing. You're not directly taking a shovel and plowing, or it's again, or have plowshares. It's only a tool, and therefore we know on Shabbos you have tools, but not on Shemitah, only unless the Torah specifically highlights them. Otherwise, there is no tools in Shemitah, and because there's no tools in Shemitah, we're relaxed and we allow you to, when there's a loss, to divert these waters, spring there. Says the Gemara, Avos Asrachmana, only the Avos the Torah Asa the Shemitah. Tuldas le Asrachmana, but the Tulda and what's happening here, irrigating the field, is only a Tulda, is not Asa Midrabanan. And how do I know that? See, because it says a pasuk, Ubashana Hashviyis, in the 7th year, Shabbos Shabbosan Yeh La'aretz, the 7th year is the land should remain fallow. Sadcha le'sizah, don't plant your field, and so on and so forth. Mechdi, and then it says there also you shouldn't go ahead and to cut down your vineyards. Now, Mechdi is mila, or shouldn't plant your vineyards as well. Mechdi is mila because cutting or pruning your vineyards, it causes it to grow. And then the Torah also says that you shouldn't and then it says by grape it says they're both the same thing. But my hilchas are kasher nachmana. Why did the Torah write them both? The memra to tell you the hani tuldas mechayiv. Only these tuldas are chayiv. Only these tuldas where you're not directly, you're cutting and that makes it grow. I consider that growing and you are chayiv. But all other tuldas Mahatayla, there's no chiyuv. So watering a field on Shemitah is only midrabanan. Even when there's no Shemitah Mahatayla, and you have to lie the ground, leave the ground like fallow, is only midrabanan. And therefore, our Mishnah says that you're allowed to divert a spring there if you're avoiding a loss. We'll continue Mitzvah tomorrow night, 10 o'clock, tomorrow, Motzei Shabbos.